The word now to Arne Melchior. Melchior? Yes, Melchior from Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, which is one of the parts of the project, and it is a very crucial part of the project because actually our project is called the development of Siberia, Far East and Far North. Because Far North is a big project for Russia too, both in transportation-wise and resource-wise. So we have, that's why the Norwegians who have a first-class experience and knowledge of that area are very useful for our project. Arne, please.
Okay, so thank you very much, and thanks again for the invitation. I'm honored to be here. It's a very interesting field of research. And I think I am among the handful of economists here. Many of you have the focus on the political aspects and legal aspects and political economy aspects. So I will focus more on the kind of economic aspects. But I think whatever you try to do politically, if you move uphill or downhill, matters a lot for the possibility of implementing schemes. So that's why it's worthwhile to look into the economic aspects. So the title is CIS Countries and Russian Regions, Trade Integration and the Shift to Asia. So I will consider how the CIS countries and Russian regions kind of respond to the international, to globalization and changes in international trade and growth of Asia. So I will empirically analyze the international trade of the CIS and Russia. So how much trade is there within the CIS area? How much is there with Europe? How much with Asia? And how has this shifted over time? The second part, I will use numerical modeling to shed light on the inter-regional trade within Russia. So how does the, for example, globalization affect the intra-national integration in Russia, and how can you affect this by, for example, infrastructure development and other measures? An idea underlying this is that we cannot treat China, Russia, India, or the other big countries like Luxembourg. This is obvious for most people, I think, but when it comes to statistical analysis, people often do it. One data point, but especially for trade and such issues. Of course, Russia is a vast country, China is, India is, etc. So I have done some work in this field trying to kind of decompose the large nation. Because there, for example, for Russia, it's obviously clear that the east and the west of Russia will have different location and therefore different economic links. It builds on earlier work on Russia and China, on India and China, and the publications are listed in the paper. If you want to read more about the analysis, you will find them there. It's also a start of a new project which will focus on Russia, and I will do more work. So this is kind of preliminary, where I use some of the modeling developed for China and India to shed light on Russia, and this will later be improved to become more kind of accurate to describe Russia. So the first about the CIS trade. So why do we focus on CIS since the focus is on Russia? It is because the countries of CIS have a kind of similar location to Russian regions, similar size in some cases, so they can tell us how do such regions respond to international trade shifts. So this shows that these are shares of world trade for CIS countries. CIS is the 15 minus Baltic, in the Baltics, but the other post-Soviet states. So these are the shares of world trade, and you see there is a very fast growth in the trade shares of CIS. So this is especially the case for the two upper curves. Is there a pointer too? No. Yes. Okay. So the two upper curves shows the extra-regional trade. Exports is the blue line, imports is the red line, and the lowest curve is the intra-CIS trade. So you see that all the three ones are increasing. So even the intra-CIS trade grows and its share in the world economy grows, but the two external trade flows grow much faster. So CIS gets more kind of globalized. If you look at the sector pattern, you will see that the blue tall columns show the oil, gas, and heavy oil and gas exports. which is number one in exports. Heavy industry as another kind of main industry. There is less exports of consumer goods and capital goods. Imports are more diversified, but there is a big increase for machinery and transport equipment. And if you look at the green columns, number 2 from the right, you see there is a big increase from 2000 to 2012 for the imports of machinery and transport equipment. And much of this is actually from Asia. So this is the big trade expansion with Asia, more imports of machinery and transport equipment, also some consumer goods. So if you look at the regional pattern here, the columns in the middle is the shares for EU, EEA, that is kind of Western Europe. So you see that is still the largest trade partner, but the other curves may be difficult. Can you see it properly? The most interesting thing to observe there is that to the left you see that there is a very sharp decline for the imports from the CIS area, from number 3 to number 4. And there is, on the second cluster of columns, you see there is a very strong increase for Asia. So there is a shift to Asia, especially in the sense that CIS countries now import goods from Asia instead of from the CIS. This is, there is variation across countries, and this is, of course, influenced by Russia, because Russia is clearly the largest country included here. So here is the regional pattern for Russia, and you see the same occurs. So for Russia, for example, I'll just find the figures, just a second. So for Russia, for example, the share of imports from Asia increased from 9 to 29% from 2000 to 2012, which is a relatively short time span. So there is a very dramatic increase. So the first part then illustrates this shift to Asia, and that the share of intra-trade in the CIS area is actually limited. It's approaching 1/5 for the whole area. It's approaching 1/10 for Russia. In the second part, we look at trade inside Russia using a model with 166 countries and regions worldwide. So this to the right here, you see the world map with India, China, and Russia to the right, Americas to the left, and it's more disaggregated for Asia, since the purpose is to analyze Asia. So it's tailored for India and China. Russia is split into the federal districts, and in the project starting now, we will develop this to be a bit more fine-grained and better suited for Russia. So this is kind of preliminary results. From this model, I will drop the technicalities. You can read about that in the paper, not so much in this paper, but in other references. So this is a complicated model. You solve this system of equations to derive trade and income levels in all the 166 countries and regions. So this is one of the predictions of the model, is how much trade is there inside the large nations. So here you have Russia, you have India, USA, and China. And what is driving the domestic trade in the large nations? It is their income levels, because the bigger is the economic mass, the more will they trade with themselves. The second is, of course, trade costs. If they have better roads, USA has better roads than India, and therefore it will have more internal trade. Then it's geography and density, where, of course, Russia is disadvantaged because it has a very low economic density, as already demonstrated in earlier presentations. So you see that Russia, the prediction is that Russia has very low domestic trade, much lower even than India, which has a lower income level. So the low density of Russia implies that Russia is not a kind of thriving trade machine. In the model, we have similar results also for the CIS, which are not reported, but they point in the same direction, that CIS is not like Asia and Western Europe, where you have a much larger predicted trade between the countries. So, of course, for China, the density varies, so it's more along the coast. So in the East Russia-China cooperation is, of course, to be considered that Mongolia has a lower density. Another piece of the simulation is that how much do the trade patterns deviate across the federal districts. And there you see on top there that, that the far east of Russia is predicted to have the largest international linkage. So it should have the largest share of trade with foreign countries, which is of course in Asia primarily because of the location. Then Central Europe, including Moscow, at the bottom is the federal district with the largest domestic market. So the blue curve at the bottom shows that they trade more with themselves. And their neighbors, the neighbors of Central Russia also have a lot more intra-Russian trade. So the implication of this, I used the term in the paper about a kind of white hole syndrome. I mean, you heard from physics about the black hole, where the gravity is so strong that you are pulled to the center. So, and the white hole is kind of the opposite. So the point is that the gravity forces of the economy are not very strong if you have a lower economic density and less intense internal trade. If you look at, for example, if you look at Western Europe and if you look at Asia, the most fast-growing element of trade has been the intra-regional trade. So, and in Europe, politics, in a sense, came early. So there were political decisions about integration. In Asia, the economy came first, in a sense. So the trade within Asia has developed, and Asia's share of the world economy has grown. But the intra-regional trade in Asia has actually grown faster than Asia's exports to the rest of the world, for example. So the point with this paper is to show that this kind of development will not take place for Russia or the CIS. So you cannot expect a similar force of gravity development driven by the kind of domestic or intra-regional trade. So CIS cannot become the EU. And Russia also has a challenge in the sense that it has peripheral regions that will trade more with the foreign countries than with the rest of Russia. So the implication is that you have to follow two tracks. You have to find the right mix of internal and external trade integration. And trade integration, by that we mean building infrastructure, we're reducing tariffs, whatever. So the point is that, that if you don't have a strong core with a very intense economic interaction, like you have in East Asia, and which you have had in Western Europe, if you don't have that, you have to follow the two tracks, internally and externally. So that is the message.